And everyone, come on in, grab a seat. Hopefully lunch was good. Our next panel session is going to be probabilistic applications by operators. And we're really fortunate to have a great chair for this, Nitika Mago, the Director of Electric Grid Operations from ERCOT. So Nitika, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, let's see if we can make this work. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Welcome back from lunch to the session, as Debbie described, probabilistic applications by operators. So we'll do our best to keep things moving forward on the topic of how probabilistic forecasts are being used in operations to make decisions and so to inform about risks that may show up. So building on this morning's discussions, where we heard about challenges to solar forecasting, wildfires, PSPS. So we'll switch gears from talking about challenges of forecasting to how uncertainty can be used to communicate risk and help inform operational decisions. So for those who've been following this particular topic, the Forecasting and Meteorology workshop has been keeping this particular panel around applications of probabilistic forecasting pretty much here every summer since about 2023. So this is really, today is really an opportunity to take stock of how the discussions have evolved and how different organizations are beginning to put these ideas into practice. What are the lessons they are learning? What are the things they are seeing? So on. We have an information-packed panel for you. We have two presenters who represent system operators. We have two presenters who represent forecast vendors. We will hear from MISO and New England ISO on how uncertainty is being used and being brought into operational risk assessments, and how they are helping to support operator-facing decisions in the control rooms. We'll hear from UL Solutions and Amperon on how uncertainty can be communicated in actionable ways for different varieties of users, not just system operators, market participants, IPPs, so on. Across the four presentations, I hope you will start seeing what is working, what is still evolving, where are the places where there is more opportunities for the industry to continue working on. So as far as logistics go, we will, like we did in the previous two sessions, we'll invite the speakers to come and make their presentations. And at the end of their presentations, we'll try to allocate about 40 minutes or so for Q&A. So there'll be ample time to ask questions of these gentlemen and panelists. So to preserve the flow of this session, please hold on to your questions, write them down, and in a little bit, we'll get to each and every one of them. So with that said, let's move on and bring in our first presenter. Our first presenter is Matt Campbell from MISO. Matt is the manager of operations risk assessment at MISO. He will discuss how MISO is operationalizing uncertainty through its uncertainty platform and related tools. And Matt will also get into what experiences they are seeing and as they use these tools in practice. What are the lessons they are learning? What are the things they are changing? So without further ado, Matt, stage is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Campbell. I am the manager of operations risk assessment at MISO. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've operationalized uncertainty. As she indicated, we've seen a lot of change over the last couple of years. Things have become more dynamic. Really traditional methodology of forecasting has changed, and with that, we've had to adapt as a RTO ISO as well. So a little bit about MISO, just quickly. We serve a fairly large footprint, expanding all the way from the Gulf Coast up into Canada. And we really separate these regionally from the south, the central, north central, and then up into Canada. And one of the biggest changes we've seen, as others have seen, is a growth of diversification in our generation. Just several years ago, we barely had anything to talk about when we mentioned wind or solar. That has now become a big part of our generation fleet. As of June of this year, we have a little over 30 gigawatts of wind and about 21 gigawatts of capacity in solar. So as I mentioned, traditional load forecasting has changed and it's not sustainable. We can't use the same approach that we've used over the last several years. And with that, we've had to take a more strategic direction that we focus on what do we consider operational reliability? How do we integrate efficiency? But at the same time, how do we reduce risk? And what are the processes or the enhancements that we can make to existing processes to achieve those goals? The demands of the grids are changing. We have that elevated uncertainty. We have significant risk with renewable generation growing at such a rapid rate that we are seeing our ramp times shift. So where we've traditionally seen a ramp occur, say around 6 p.m. in the evening, we're now seeing that shift into the later hours. So those are adjustments that we have to make in order to accommodate that, especially when we have such a large generation fleet that's using solar with both the high morning ramps and then the high evening down ramps. With that, we've seen complex developments within our load pockets. And then we're expected to produce a forecast, from the day ahead through the 7-day window, and improve our intraday risk assessments and uncertainty to our operators in the control room, which just adds additional complexity to those challenges. So here I've got something that I'm sure all can relate to. As I mentioned, a changing and dynamic environment. We've seen changes with the net load shapes. We've seen changes with stability with the complex load pockets, meeting frequency challenges, and now we have large loads that are coming in. And in some cases in these areas that are bringing a potential load that exceeds that of the whole area, the whole regional area. So to be able to forecast that and to be able to provide a reliable forecast certainly comes with quite the list of challenges. So I'm gonna change up just a little bit here. Lots of great discussions these last couple of days on everything from uncertainty to fire forecasting to integrating meteorology into these risks and the risk assessment process that we have. And it's great discussion, but it leads us to the question of how do we apply that? How do we find ways and mechanisms to integrate what we're talking about, what we're studying? Where do we see the value? Where do we see the benefits? A couple of years ago, one of my colleagues presented at ESIG here on the answer that MISO had, which was the uncertainty platform. The uncertainty platform was an innovative idea that we would use to address these challenges, how we would capture the uncertainty, how would we integrate that into the risk that we're seeing, not just in the day ahead, but in the intraday, and then in all of the forecasting windows. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we've made those steps and made some of the transitions from what was really a concept and an idea into something that is actively providing value to MISO and its membership today. I won't have time to get real deep in the weeds with a lot of these, so this is going to be a lot of high-level discussion. But as mentioned, the idea has now come to fruition where we're providing lots of information, lots of data to our operators. We have the similar day, we call it the similar day tool, you could call it the similar day model. What this is doing is this is looking at our load and our temp and our relationships and comparing that against the historical pieces of what we've seen in the past and how does it compare. All of those values being looked at on a daily basis, and then that's visualized on a dashboard where we can see a confidence level and how that day is going to perform against that day that we're looking at. Another one I'd highlight is our net load. So that's our load minus our renewables. It paints a path forward in looking at what is the observed ramp values, what are the forecast trends, and then what is the forecast behavior over different time profiles. And so with that, it lets us put together a visualization that helps operators drive in some of those decisions. Something that they didn't have a view to before, especially as we started talking about these changes and shifts in ramp rates or ramp times. Another one that I would highlight is the gas pipeline and fail to start dashboard. Again, part of our uncertainty platform. This uses data from survey data from our market participants to highlight where's our risk with our generation fleet on the thermal side. Are we seeing risk with pipelines, gas supply issues? This is especially critical in the wintertime. The fail to start dashboard is also looking at the fleet performance in a given set of temperatures. Again, going back, looking at historical performance with that, and then gives us a dashboard on what is the, I'll say, quote unquote, probability that the particular generator would be at risk of starting in those given conditions. Here's just a little demonstration of the fail to start dashboard. Again, using the survey results from the market participant, the comparison of temperatures. It is forward-looking 7 days. And each generator is given a risk profile, and then that profile is quantified as megawatts at risk. And one of the products that I'm probably going to spend most of the time on today is our net uncertainty model. So again, our uncertainty platform has actually kind of changed names. We're now calling it the risk platform, and that's mainly because we have seen opportunities to develop out different and various tools or models that either feed in or out of the uncertainty platform. So it makes more sense to call it just the risk platform, because now we're seeing where different models can sit. And one of those is the net uncertainty model. And so what I have here on the screen is demonstrating what we're visually showing each day. This gives us a hour by hour performance really on how we're doing for that day. We also generate a net uncertainty value for the day ahead. So that's going to tell us, based on all things considered, where are we pre-positioning ourselves and what risks and uncertainty can we quantify out of that in order to make a determination. And that determination is classified as low, medium, or high. That low, medium, or high is really dynamic based on the operating day. And it's done through a regressional analysis daily to set those thresholds. If those thresholds are breached over a given set of hours or number of hours, that's where the low, medium, or high comes in. Once we see that breach of that threshold, either we're already moving into that day as a medium or high, or we have the opportunity to say, you know, there's some things we're seeing here that maybe aren't being picked up or not being quantified correctly. We feel that we're not going to be a low, a medium, or high is more appropriate. And so with that, we can do an override, which then adjusts our commitment thresholds and opens up our STRs. Under Winter Storm MISO, which is when we first had this model operationalized, we saw it perform very well. It actually positioned us in our generation fleet days ahead of the actual elevated uncertainty. The model was predicting in that highlighted area there that you see in yellow a significant amount of uncertainty, which then led to a high being called for the next couple of days, again, opening up and pre-positioning our control room for better decision making. This is just an example of what the low, medium, high uncertainty looks like when you look at it from hour by hour. So you can see here in this given day selected, which is March 16th, Each hour is categorized the low, medium, high. On this day, hours 11 through 19, the model picked up as high. So that drove some additional STRs for that day, keeping reliability up and not having to call up additional units that would have been in a much shorter window. So the net uncertainty models, its performance has been really good, but I would be amiss to say that there's not opportunities for improvement. And what that means is the net uncertainty model today is based on an aggregate model. So all things considered are feeding in, but give us very limited visibility on what is truly driving the low, medium, and high classification that the model is giving us on a daily basis. That limits our ability to have high confidence on some days, especially on days when renewable performance may not be meeting our expectations. We are now working into making this more of what we're calling an individual model. So the net uncertainty model itself is still going to provide the same information that we're seeing today. But with that, each day that we receive the net uncertainty recommendation, we'll be able to have a level of contribution or a probability of contribution based on these 4 individual models. So the load model, the wind, the solar, and the weather air. With that, we'll see and have better confidence in, say, a wind that is giving us a 30 or 35% contribution into that overall recommendation, gives us more confidence in either agreeing with the model, its suggestion, or providing an override because of patterns or trends that we've been seeing over the last, say, several days. And that's what I'll call the difference in letting a machine make the decision and without removing the human element. So we still have the human element there to provide that additional feedback to the model without giving up the confidence. And then quickly here, I'm just going to shift gears. Another product out of the uncertainty platform, again, shifting to the risk platform, was another innovative idea that we had with our renewable forecasting on the wind side, to where our renewable vendors are sending us our forecasts. There could be, say, an issue with the forecast not being received, or maybe it is a poor forecast or there's missing data. We had some previous encounters with that to where it impacted our UDS, or unit dispatch system. Then that would potentially cause some market issues. So our answer to that was, how do we capture that uncertainty when you don't know that something like that's going to happen? And that resulted in our 10-minute ahead on-site solution. So what this is doing is it's looking at our vendor forecasts. It's actively comparing against what those forecasts being sent to us are, and then what was the actuals. And as we move through each of those time periods, if there is a loss or a loss of data or a forecast that's not verifying, the system will then switch to the other vendor. And it does so without any kind of time lag and without any interruption to the UDS. So we've seen we've actually seen quite a bit of success with this, especially in periods where wind performance was not good. In some cases, like seen here, we had quite a disruption on the UDS side because of poor forecast performance. But the switch ultimately resulted in an error correction of about 350 megawatts over several different time periods. So just really to summarize, again, very high level here, just wanted to provide a quick update on where MISO is over the last couple of years. We've certainly got other things in the works that we're working towards, that we're looking to operationalize yet this year, but all the way in through the beginning of 2029. We've got a timeline that highlights what we're looking to incorporate. Lots of interesting and new things that are coming. I'd say that, from my standpoint, I've seen a lot of change just in the last year. We're trying to find ways to optimize our existing processes. One of the biggest things we've changed as a risk assessment team is the strategic direction to accommodate that dynamic market, and start looking at also incorporating things with more on-site meteorological data, to help with our intraday risk assessment process and to help tell a better forecast story moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Matt. So our next presenter is Jaren Lutenegger. Jaren is the Director of Operational Performance Training and Integration at ISO New England. Jaren will be sharing how ISO New England is beginning to bring probabilistic forecasting into operations at their end, what are the different areas that they are considering, and how they are looking to incorporate it all. So with that, Jaren, the stage is yours.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Nitika. I want to reemphasize exactly what you just said. We are still at the very beginning stages of this, and I want to actually give a huge shout out to a couple of people in the audience. You've heard them ask a few questions, but Joe Robertson, Justin Shoemaker, really key contributors to this. I have the very fortunate opportunity to be able to share a lot of really their hard work through this. As Nitika mentioned, my name is Jaren Lutenegger. I'm the Director of Operational Performance Training and Integration at ISO New England. Kind of a mouthful. High level, what we do is we help bring solutions to operational problems that maybe haven't really hit us hard yet, but thinking ahead to make sure we're always sort of one step ahead of how the system is changing. So with that, I want to just give some quick context for ISO New England, sort of load and renewables, set the stage for sort of what our system looks like. Every area ISO RTO is sort of a different mix of load, renewables, in front of the meter, behind the meter, and so forth. And those variations bring their own unique challenges. So while we hit our all-time peak back in 2006, we actually had our most recent peak in actually this time last year. It was during when we were in Nashville at this very conference. We hit our most recent all-time peak. I think it was the highest in over a decade. And then just earlier that year, we also hit our record lowest ever minimum load. So just shy of 5,500 megawatts, really driven by the behind the meter PV that you see the amount we have here, right around 8,500 megawatts of behind the meter PV. It's all really pretty invisible to us. There's some ability for us to get some sample data from inverter manufacturers and vendors, but it's time delayed, and really we don't get a great true up until the following day. So that brings a lot of unique challenges with it in terms of how our load shapes and our load uncertainty sort of translates throughout the day. Then and on top of that, an additional almost 1,000 megawatts of in front of the meter PV, also growing pretty quickly. And then roughly 2,400 megawatts of active commercial wind, though there's also a few large offshore wind sites that are still getting built and putting out some power, but that'll bring us over 3 gigawatts to about 3,300 megawatts of wind. So pretty sizable amount of renewables, but you can see the lion's share of it really is the behind the meter, mostly invisible to us in real time, and just observing through the changes in load. And we're expecting that to continue. You can see that 15 years ago or 16 years ago, we had essentially none. We're at 8,500 megawatts, growing several megawatts every day. And then we're also seeing that we're projecting to have in about 10 years time over 12.5 gigawatts of solar. Again, behind the meter, that's not inclusive of the in front of the meter growth that we're also continuing to see. And a lot of it's centralized within Massachusetts, but really there's areas throughout northern New England as well that have fairly significant amount of solar, at least relative to the amount of load that is up in some of those areas. So we see, not uncommonly in some of the spring areas, Vermont as a state might be entirely served by their behind the meter solar and actually a net exporter to the whole rest of the system, almost looking like a generator, but just the load feeding back up onto the system. So we've been doing deterministic forecasting for longer than we've even been in existence. Prior to ISO New England, there was still a regional system operator, and deterministic forecasting is being used. We'll continue to use it. It still has a place that we feel is important, and we're continuously looking to improve that. But really, in the last year or so, we've been diving much more into probabilistic forecasting space. We've benefited extremely from past panelists and others in the industry. Probabilistic forecast user group has been incredible for us. We brought a whole group of people last year and had many questions. And hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to contribute some more of our own thoughts. I know I'm only able to talk for about 10-15 minutes here, so I can barely scratch the surface. But a lot of our initial exploration of probabilistic forecasting was focused on individual components. So looking at what the load forecast looked like, what the solar forecast looked like, what the wind forecast looked like. We've gotten wind and solar forecasts probability bands from vendors for several years. We've struggled to operationalize them. And so we've been really taking a much harder look this past year in terms of how do we take that next leap from these individual probabilistic forecasts and turn them into something that we can actually make decisions based off of and use within real-time operations, within our day ahead, within outage coordination, within all of our various operations teams. And that's what's leading us more towards a weather-driven analysis, something that would actually be able to connect these different probabilistic forecasts together in a way that would make them more realistic, where you can't just take a P90 of the load, the wind, the solar, and say, that's our 90% probability of risk. That's something that we've heard loud and clear and have been moving in the direction of how do you connect these in a way that actually demonstrates the true nature of the weather and the physics. And that's where we see the sort of having the weather rooted as the foundation that drives these scenarios. And then we're also working on really thinking, kind of beginning with the end in mind. What is the decisions we're trying to make with these probabilistic forecasts, and using those decisions to really tailor how are we going to go about developing them and how are we going to use them. We need to make sure that we don't land in a similar spot we've been historically, where we get probabilistic forecasts, or if we develop probabilistic forecasts, we show them to control room operators, outage coordinators, engineers, and they say, okay, cool, that's interesting. I like the colors and everything, but like, what do I do with this information? How do I use this in a consistent manner where, when they're changing, shift turnovers and so forth, that we're doing things in a methodical way. And so this decision focused framework is something that I think is in a way sort of emulating some of what Matt had just talked about, sort of their risk platform in ways that allow them to make sort of consistent, methodical, decision focused analyses. So just quickly jumping into just one concept of how we're doing some of the weather-driven analysis. There's several other concepts that I don't have the time to talk about, but this is one I thought was more recent in our development and something that we think is really exciting. But essentially using NWP ensemble members and generating scenarios based off of those. You might imagine that's why some of the questions in previous panels have been about how do we take these NWP ensemble members and assign a probability to them, or know which ones are more likely to happen than others. Because while individually they're helpful and we can see the mean or the spread, it'd be very helpful for us to be able to assign which ones are more likely to happen than others. And again, use those to shape some of our decision making. At a high level, the steps are broken down here, taking the different ensemble members, taking just the weather from them that is focused for New England, running that weather through PV forecast models. Wind forecast models is something as well that's in the early stages, and then running those PV and weather models through load forecast models. Again, our load forecast is so heavily dependent on the solar forecast as well because of the amount of behind the meter PV. So this was just a screenshot of what some of that could look like, where you have all the different NWP members, and while you might have a mean, you could see some have a lot of uncertainty on this given day. This was actually earlier this year in March. You can see that some ensemble members thought we were going to have 5.5 gigawatts of solar, and others thought we would have 500, and so that creates obviously a lot of uncertainty within our load forecasts. So switching over to our probabilistic analysis framework that we're working on, we're working from the ground up on this in a lot of ways. We have a lot of one-off deterministic tools. That's kind of what I was just referring to. We have individual load forecasts that have sort of probability bands with them. We get probabilistic forecasts from vendors for wind and solar forecasts, but we need to take those and turn them into something that would actually allow us to move higher up on the stack into sort of those decision-made ready products. So this is just an example of how it could be applied within a capacity margin analysis. That's sort of the first area that we're looking to explore this with, though it could be applied for many other use cases. But working on actively building prototypes for building a 7-day weather, load, wind, solar scenario engine, and then being able to use that to feed into something also new that we're working on, building a probabilistic capacity analysis tool. So you might think of, we have many different methods, pretty well established on how to do a deterministic capacity analysis. And really, this is what we think is our next evolution, still in the prototyping phase, to turn those into a probabilistic analysis that then would feed into our ability to make a decision based off of this information, identify what is that level of risk within these different time horizons. And also, kind of to Matt's point earlier, having that traceability, I'm going to get to in just a second, having that traceability to know where's that level of uncertainty coming from. Is it tied to specific weather parameters that are impacting the solar? Is it impacting, is it other pieces of like temperature that's impacting just the amount of load overall? Is it cloud cover at various locations? So, and then there's on top of this a whole extra set of use cases that we'd like to be able to use this for, and layer on our power system model on top of this, which comes with its own level of complexities that we have not quite gotten to yet. But what this look like, things we have, we have wind, solar forecasts, we have load forecasts. What is the big piece that's more recent within ISO New England, at least, is stitching them together using this copula correlation method. So having a way to tie together the various distributions and interdependencies and the correlations between the wind, solar, and load distributions in a way that still matches basically the underlying weather conditions in a way that then allows us to see sort of these scenarios in a traceable manner. Some of the next pieces we're working on building, again, that would be needed for the 7-day capacity margin calculation are things like interchange. Interchange is not something that is certain either. That also has its own level of uncertainty and probabilities, forced outages, generation capability, and then a whole layer of other things that equally probably as important, but much harder, I think, for us at this point in time. Things like gas pipeline dependencies, batteries, storage, state of charge, limited oil capabilities, and so forth. So what this looks like at a high level, again, is just stitching those various forecasts together using that copula, having that be able to then pick samples of this using those different correlations of the interdependencies to maintain that consistency of the underlying weather scenarios, and then being able to package that together in a way that could feed into an interchange model, a forced outage model, and then ultimately be able to develop probability distributions of our capacity margin by hour for the next 7 days. So that's what we're actively working on. Some of the future use cases here are sort of build upon that in longer time horizons. Outage coordination is another one that we see a lot of challenges within. It goes out, up to 2 years is when we do our outage coordination process, when it really starts. And you can imagine a lot of different data that would be available 2 years from now versus 2 days from now. And so still having some ability to probabilistically assess how much capacity and risk we have in those different time horizons would be important for making decisions on, do we approve outages, do we not, and what are the impacts of various outages that we approve. We have various localized high voltage issues, particularly at the very low loads. So having some way to probabilistically assess what is our need to actually commit generation and provide more dynamic reactive support is another decision that we're looking to make and use this platform to help us with. And then last but not least, more in the market function, similar again to what Matt had described, having more dynamic regulation and reserve optimization. So having it actually taken into consideration in real time our level of uncertainty in these various forecasts and other risks to set both the requirements and therefore then impact market pricing and the incentives for resources that can provide these services. So, I'll leave it there, but feel free, message me or stop by. We're sitting, ISO folks are sitting over in the corner on the side over here. So feel free to stop us at the break or if you want to grab a drink after the panel is over or after the session's over. So thank you.
Thank you, Jaren. Our next presenter is Matt Cote from UL Solutions. Matt is the Director of Forecasting at UL. Matt will spend his presentation sharing with us how forecast uncertainty can be communicated in actionable ways. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nitika. Hi, everyone. Great conference so far, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all about communicating uncertainty in actionable ways with the focus on renewable energy forecasts, wind and solar. I think there's been a lot of talk so far at the conference about probabilistic forecasts, uncertainty here at this panel, and also event forecasting. One of the things I'm going to try to do is bridge the gap between those a little bit to kind of present a holistic case for you all. The other thing I think we all need to keep in mind is that there's always a lot of attention in trying to get the forecast right, get it as accurate as we possibly can, right? And but we're always going to have some uncertainty. We're never going to get it all perfect all the time. So we have to accept that uncertainty. And so what we're going to try to present to you today are some ways that we can do that, and again to hopefully result in some better outcomes for everybody. So I'll go through some background on renewable energy forecast uncertainty, POE forecast, individual ensemble member forecast. We've seen some of that here in this session as well as others so far, and go through a series of more and more complicated examples to how we can apply this. Just a little bit about UL Solutions. We've been forecasting wind and solar energy for about 25 years or more now. Independent system operators, utilities, energy traders, owners and operators, basically anybody who needs forecasting services, front of the meter, behind the meter, what have you, custom solutions as well. So I like to think of uncertainty in a few different ways. One is if you consider only the weather forecast uncertainty and again, we're focusing here on wind and solar forecasts. So the idea would be, what's the uncertainty with the wind speed? What's the uncertainty with cloud cover? Things like that. And you can basically present that in terms of probability of exceedance forecasts, confidence bands as a single one, a pair, or many of them. And you can also present those in a scenario-based way where you look at individual ways that a situation could evolve. These could be based off of individual NWP members, ensemble members. One thing that we also do on our side is we provide machine learning based ensemble members that are based off of NWP, and they're trained against our customers' data. Now, things get a little bit more complicated when you also consider some of the discrete events or hazards that are specific to renewables. So these can include ramp events, high-speed cutouts, ice or snow buildup, which can affect both wind and solar, avian curtailments for wind stow conditions, hail stow for solar panels, wildfire smoke, and the list goes on and on. We've seen some of these talked about today with a big focus on winter weather impacts this morning. So that falls into this same category. So an important question to ask is if you're just getting a forecast that includes, say, a 10 and 90% POE forecast, do you know if that forecast actually includes the impacts from any of these events? And it's okay if it does. It's okay if it doesn't. There are ways that you can handle it, for both scenarios, but it's important that you know. Because when you introduce these events, you have a whole other range of uncertainty metrics, right? So when is the event going to start? There's uncertainty around when it's going to start, if it's going to happen at all, the magnitude, the timing impacts, of those events. And then especially for things like snow on solar panels, turbine icing for wind, the probability of reduced generation after a triggering event. How long is that going to go on for? How is it going to evolve? How is it going to end? Things like that. So you can present POEs, you can present scenarios, you can provide alerts to identify the risks and the essential parameters of those risks. Now, the other way I like to look at this, and this is, again, especially true for snow on panels and turbine icing events, is your forecast before the event, because at that point, you don't know if the event's going to happen. There may be a certain probability that it will happen or not. So when you're presenting a forecast to an end user, you need to account for the possibility that it will happen, and then how is it going to evolve from there, how it will eventually end. But then also, what if it doesn't happen, and what will that scenario look like for the end user? Then when you get to the during the event period, so let's say the event does actually happen, recognizing that it is in progress, communicating that to the end users, as well as its magnitude, its impact, and then again, what the evolution of that's going to be, and if it will end during the forecast period, how will that end? So just a very simple example here for a solar POE forecast on 2 types of days. The top one is a relatively uneventful day. These are 10 and 90% POE forecasts. The bottom one, not too exciting, but it does have some more downside solar risk. So one way that some of our customers are using probabilistic forecasts here is to basically feed the confidence bandwidth or the spread into some downstream algorithms that can help quantify uncertainty or risk for that particular day. Now, there's a couple of important points here. On their own, POE forecasts don't really provide context for what the sources of potential uncertainty are. So they could just be differences in how the weather models are characterizing the level of wind or solar for that day. There could be the possibility for up or down ramps that occurred during that. So you could go from near the top of the band to near the bottom of the band or vice versa. Or is the uncertainty, a result of the potential for high variability during that day? It doesn't really tell you anything about that, just that there's uncertainty. The other thing to keep in mind with POE forecasts is that the actuals are expected to sometimes fall outside of those bounds. So a 90% POE, for example, you would expect that about 10% of the time, the actuals should come in below that value if it's tuned properly. So it really depends on your level of risk that you want to assume there. One other point that's not characterized here is aggregate forecasts versus individual wind or solar plant forecasts. They are not the same thing. You can't get, the uncertainty for an aggregate by just adding up the POEs from the individuals. So if you want an aggregate or a regional type of uncertainty, you need to forecast that directly because of error cancellation. Now, if you switch gears to the ensemble member approach or scenario-based forecasts, we've seen some of this also. This is a very simple plot for a wind case where we've got about 5 different members here characterizing, what might happen over this period. And it's the same case on the bottom plot, but just represented as a 20% and 80% POE. So you can see how you can get from, some of the input ensemble members to a POE type of forecast. Now, individual model forecasts can depict scenarios of how an event might unfold, whereas a POE forecast is going to be more tuned to just the level of megawatts that you might expect, not necessarily the scenario of how it's going to evolve. But the other thing about the ensemble forecasts is that they don't necessarily give an indication for how likely any of those particular scenarios is going to be. So you can see some possible scenarios, but you don't know how likely they will be, whereas the POE forecasts are tuned to that megawatt level. So recognizing that the POE forecast, the actuals can fall outside of that band. With the individual ensemble member forecasts, as long as your subset of members that you're showing there captures kind of like the tail ends, you have a better chance that the actuals may actually be captured within that envelope. And so that can be used to assess, downstream uncertainty risk. It can also, give you a bit more of an indication of potential edge risk cases there. Here's an example of a high-speed cutout event. This is for a particular wind farm. The shaded areas represent when the actual high-speed cutout events, in this case, happened. So you'll see that in the first part of the event, this is when the power dropped off to about less than half of capacity. These are all actuals here. I'll show you the forecast in a minute. The wind speed then dropped very quickly. So the power actually came up as you came out of high speed cutout, and then it dropped so low that the power actually came down even lower. And then after that, the wind speeds ramped back up, eventually triggering a second brief high speed cutout event. So how do you represent this if you're getting POE forecasts, if you're getting ensemble forecasts, if you're getting both? This is a bit of a complicated plot just to show you the amount of data that we're dealing with. And one of the tricks here is to actually condense this information as something that's usable and actionable. So we have a few different things here. We have individual ensemble members, 11 of them plotted. You may have many more that go into the actual forecast, so they're not all shown here. You also have a 10% and 90% POE that are represented by the dashed lines. And you have background shading on this plot to show you the risk areas of when a high-speed cutout might actually occur. So the red line here is the deterministic forecast. You'll see that it's somewhat muted. The POE forecasts actually show a much better representation of the potential magnitude of the cutout. The timing is off by about an hour or two. The subsequent down ramp associated with the decreasing winds is captured very well by all of these. But one of the interesting things is that the second case, even though it triggered a mostly non-impactful, brief high-speed cutout event, the individual ensemble members that are shown here, at least, don't really show that. The deterministic forecast doesn't show that. The POE forecast, really no representation of it, even though the actual megawatt values do actually fall within the spread of the confidence bands. Now, why is this happening? Let me show you another type of way of looking at this. So for this, I have introduced the concept of scenarios of megawatt losses. So we've got a no cutout scenario, in which case the forecast is basically at full power. That's the dashed line at the top. A likely scenario, if the cutout happens, that's the green dashed line, and more of a worst case scenario, the yellow dashed line at the bottom. Now, the background shading for the second event does actually capture this period. And there's a couple of reasons why there's actually a high-speed cutout risk here that's being represented in these loss scenarios, as well as the background alert shading. That's because, one, not all of the ensemble members are plotted here, so there are at least a few in the background that are showing the risk for high-speed cutout directly. And the other is that many of the members actually show wind speeds approaching high-speed cutout range, but not actually getting there. So simply the proximity of the forecasted wind speeds to the high-speed cutout kind of threshold is triggering the risk here that you're showing that there is a chance for a high-speed cutout event. So let me introduce here another concept as well, and that's the concept of a variability index. We haven't really talked much about this. We've talked a lot about uncertainty and probabilistic forecasting scenarios and such. But if you look at this particular case, there's a lot of variability up and down. And characterizing that, remember, POEs don't inherently communicate variability, just uncertainty. So what we're trying to do here with a variability index is to concisely indicate to users how variable the generation might be on a particular day relative to historical norms. So you can essentially do a variability climatology. You can also do this with uncertainty or some other things as well. The important thing is to try to characterize what's happening in this day relative to what's happened in the past, so that operators have a sense of how different is this event potentially going to be? So if you put this all together, we have POE forecasts here that are inclusive of event-driven megawatt losses. We have event-based scenario forecasts. That's the kind of the bottom chart there with the loss scenarios. You have the shading and alerts in the background, which can also be represented by email alerts. We've heard talk about email alerts as well to end users. And then individual ensemble member forecasts, I would propose here as maybe like an on-off toggle or a separate chart for those users that want to see them, because quite honestly, some people don't really know what to do with them, and they can really clog up a plot, and they can just make it more distracting. So it's easy to basically turn that on and off for the users that want to see it. When you do it in this way, you get valuable forecast context, you get a historical perspective, explainable risk assessment, and from that you can get actionable insights that will ultimately, hopefully, end up in more favorable outcomes for you. Now, I know I'm out of time. I'm going to briefly talk about a turbine icing event here, which there's a lot of parallels with this, between this and snow on solar panels events. The primary icing period is over a 2-day period here, shown by the green line. The cut-in wind speed is shown by the dashed line here. So any of the blue lines, that's the wind speed, that are above the dashed line represent times when there should have been generation, but there was not. The onset of the icing event is kind of at the beginning of the period as the wind speeds dropped off dramatically. And the de-icing period occurred two days later when the temperatures approached and eventually rose above freezing. Again, you can see parallels with snow on panels that was talked about extensively this morning. So how can we use the concepts we've already talked about here in a turbine icing event? We've got background shading. Similar to before, we've got POE forecasts that are inclusive of turbine icing impacts. But an important thing, as I mentioned before, is when you're in an event, it's important to recognize that icing is reducing generation by approximately how much, and communicating that fact to the end users so they know that when you get de-icing, you can get a sudden increase in power output if the wind speeds will support it. So the key problem here becomes the evolution due to de-icing. So ensemble member forecasts here, you can use them if they can discretely show de-icing situations, which you can if you incorporate things like temperature, radiance, wind speed, precipitation, basically anything that might affect the de-icing period. But if you just use ensemble members like a wind speed through a power curve, that may not be directly correlated here with the power output because of the icing. So an effective representation here is comprised of the POE forecasts, the no ice scenario, and the kind of worst case scenario type of forecasts, and the background alert shading. So some final comments here. There are a lot of input data sources used for renewable energy forecasting that can be consolidated and presented in different ways. We've shown some of examples of that here. But the exact forecasts and products that can be most useful for your particular application should be determined through consultation with your forecasting providers. Then once you have this information, equally important is to decide what you do with it afterwards. We heard some of that from the first two talks in this panel here. I'll leave you with a few thoughts there. Some of it can be handled by entering outages and derates. Some of it can be handled with forecast overrides, either through a service you subscribe to or when you implement yourself, user playbooks and training for the end users. And then again, developing automated algorithms that ingest and use that data to characterize the risk and the uncertainty in your forecast period. And we know some of that's already going on, and I'm sure will continue to be done as well. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that insightful presentation, Matt. Our final speaker this afternoon is Karen Gerby. Karen is the Senior Director of Product at Amperon. Karen is going to spend some time sharing how probabilistic renewable generation forecasts are being used by IPPs and market participants to understand forecast risk, evaluate potential commercial impacts, and make informed market participation decisions. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nitika. Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Gerby. I work for Amperon. Happy to be up here. I've been at a few of these, but I've never presented before, so this is very exciting. Today, I'm going to walk through how we develop our probabilistic renewable generation forecasts, and then speak a little bit to how we are working with some independent power producers to help quantify uncertainty and how they're making decisions based off our forecasts. There we go. So a little bit about Amperon. We forecast load and renewables and price, both at the grid level and then also down to individual assets for renewables and down to individual meters on the load side and pretty much everything in between, aggregated meters, you name it. So kind of across the board. Yeah, we started out as a load forecasting shop and have expanded. So I guess, yeah, as we get into the IPPs here, why do probabilistic forecasts matter to them? Historically, a lot of decisions have been made using point forecasts. The challenge there is that this does not communicate risk. We need to understand not only what they're expected to generate, but also the uncertainty around it, what's the downside, and what's the risk. There's a lot of reasons this matters. There's imbalance exposure, congestion risk, curtailment probability, battery dispatch uncertainty, revenue volatility. And these are things that really impact business outcomes. There's real financial risk on the line. So there's, these are big decisions they need to make every day. So what are the sources of uncertainty in an asset level renewable forecast? There's a lot. It's very different than forecasting at the grid level. We've kind of talked about this just now. There's local weather effects that dominate. So, a small shift in cloud cover can have a really big impact. Localized wind conditions can material impact production. And second, forecast uncertainty changes significantly based on the weather regime, right? A big cold front can move in. Fog can move in and really impact things. So how does that impact the forecast? So this first yellow box here, those 2 days, June 10th and June 11th, this is a forecast for one of the assets that we have in our book. It's a 250 megawatt asset solar farm. So I just pulled this data last week. You can see the spread is really pretty wide those first 2 days. The deterministic forecast is that dark purple line. It shoots down, it's at like 180 on June 10th. It goes down June 11th, but the spread is pretty wide across both of those. And then the next 3 days, the deterministic forecast is almost at the exact same level, but there's very different levels of uncertainty. That fifth day, the band is really a lot wider for the P10 to P90, even though the point forecast was the same. So other things that really feed into uncertainty for an asset level forecast that impact Amperon directly, and I'm sure the IPPs here feel this too, curtailment, outages, inverter degradation, telemetry issues. These are all data signals that feed into our machine learning models, and we're training on that data, right? So we need to make sure that we're separating noise from the forecast as we produce these. Forgot where the button was. All right. Before I get into our probabilistic forecast methodology, just a little bit about how Amperon builds forecasts in general. We start out with a number of different inputs. We bring in over a dozen different weather forecasts. We bring in asset metadata, so tilt, azimuth, location, all that good stuff. We bring in operational data from the asset, so our customers are constantly uploading actual operational information. And then we actually build a physics-based model kind of as a baseline to produce what is the potential generation that could happen. And then from there we have linear regression, boosted trees, all the fun machine learning models that we layer on top of that. Linear regression, nice and stable, it's interpretable. The boosted tree helps capture some of those nonlinear relationships. So then from there, we bring in horizon aware modeling, make sure that cone of uncertainty is growing over time as you get further out on the curve. As I mentioned before, customers are constantly uploading data. We're able to do automatic curtailment identification, things like that, just based on tracking historical behavior. It being a machine learning model, we can pick up on patterns and recognize, okay, before this was flagged as a curtailment, we're seeing similar patterns. This is a curtailment that's happening right now. We can also calibrate new assets. This is a little tricky being in machine learning. How do you build a forecast with no history? We have some tricks to do that. It is really important to a lot of the folks that we work with. They're building new assets left and right, and they need a forecast on day one, right? So how do we really make that possible? And there's some fun stuff, happy to talk through that, but I think I need to keep moving along. As far as evaluating performance of our probabilistic forecast, we look at a few different metrics. We look at coverage error. Are we really capturing those edge events? Is the spread fully, are we Sorry, I'm fumbling here. Quantile loss, that's looking at each individual quantile to make sure that it's accurate. And then CRPS score looks at the full band of all probabilities to make sure that we're capturing accuracy there. It's closely related to like a May. So what does this actually mean for an IPP? What kind of decision are they actually going to be making? The easiest example I have here is for bidding in the day ahead, right? So they're looking at uncertainty and deciding how much generation are they going to bid into the day ahead. So on June 10th, we saw pretty standard number here for their forecast. June 11th, we see a spread roughly, sorry, I need to push this next button. We see a pretty big spread on June 11th. It goes up to 163 megawatts, right? So that's a really big spread compared to the day before. And then on June 12th, that spread really goes down. It goes to 57 megawatts. So even if the expected generation appears similar, operational risk is very different. Probabilistic forecasts really become actionable here when you start thinking about a possible bidding strategy. So if I were an IPP and I was trying to decide what to bid, 134 megawatt spread on a 250 megawatt asset, that's still pretty big. It is balanced though. It's not a very asymmetric spread between the P10 to P90, that the probabilistic one's right in the middle there. So I would probably go in at a P25. This is just a hypothetical. There's no rule to how you're going to bid based on the probabilistic spread. The next day, that's an even bigger spread, 163 megawatts. I'm going to try to, preserve my capital and not lose too much money. I don't want to overbid because I might get fined if I do so. And then the next day, I'm going to bid pretty high. I'm going to bid the P50, maximize revenue. It's a tight spread, 57 megawatts. I feel pretty confident that I'm going to hit that number. So one thing that we've really run into is regional differences across how people make decisions from an IPP perspective. In the United States, we've talked a lot about price uncertainty, congestion, and this is really going to impact your day ahead bidding strategy, intraday position management, and making sure that you're really optimizing what your position is. In Europe, things are very different. It's very much driven by imbalance exposure, curtailment risk, negative pricing, a lot of intraday market optimization going on as well. And then Latin America, lots of grid constraints, reliability and infrastructure variability, also results in a lot of curtailment and a lot of merchant revenue uncertainty. So even though the underlying forecasts are the same, very different types of decisions being made based on what risk they are being driven by, but it all comes down to money. That's all I got. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you very much again for a very insightful